We can start with the first question. And so this first question is from guest 789, and it's for Dr. Spalding. So the question is, how do we reconcile US and UK free market deals with protecting our economies from CCP's infiltration of the 5G sensor network you describe? How do we respond to the argument that we're being protectionist or anti-competitive by excluding, say, TikTok, which looks to many ordinary people like any other social media on the market? So, Dr. Spalding.
That's a great question. You know, I refer to the Atlantic Charter signed by Prime Minister Churchill and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it really established the framework for the current international system. And the things that it discussed were democratic principles, free trade, rule of law, and self-determination. These are things that the Chinese Communist Party repudiates. So the national security strategy is really focused on isolating the Chinese Communist Party from the global e-commerce economy that I mentioned, and tightening the relationships amongst democracies, economically, financially, in trade and information, and really beginning to ensure that the innovation, technology, talent, and capital that flows from democracies is reinvested in those democracies. So while the US and UK can enjoy the benefits of free trade because they have systems that are based on the founding principles I mentioned, then we can be assured that, you know, the kind of, you know, predatory economic behavior that we see with the Chinese Communist Party and China is not involved. So you have to isolate yourself from the Chinese Communist Party. You have to work together and among democracies to strengthen the founding principles. And then finally, and this is most important, you have to provide more of government leadership in terms of protecting individuals' data. In fact, encryption and control of the technology that's involved in telecommunications has to have government involvement to ensure that you don't have Chinese Communist Party or other authoritarian systems that are embedded in the private telecommunications networks that are out there. I'm not saying that the government has to control the networks. What I am saying is the government has to be involved, setting standards, actively ensuring that outside influence is not occurring either through, software or hardware.
Thank you very much, Dr. Spalding. So our next question is from a guest, and this is to the whole panel. Dominic Raab just announced that the UK government will suspend its extradition treaty with Hong Kong immediately and indefinitely, but there is fear that Beijing will retaliate. Is this fear warranted, and what might they do? So who would like to start? Who would like to answer first? Benedict? Yeah. Please, Mr. Rogers. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted now. Well, let me say, first of all, that I really welcome Dominic Raab's announcement. It follows, of course, Canada, Australia, and the United States in doing this. And I think it's an essential step especially because under the national security law in Hong Kong, there is an extraterritorial element to that law in Article 38, which basically says that anyone, anywhere in the world, whether they come from Hong Kong or not, can be in breach of Hong Kong's national security law. So actually what we're doing now and is probably in breach of the security law, and I think I've been in breach of the security law many times each day every day since it was introduced. So, and I'm not worried about my security, but I am worried about the security of Hong Kongers who are outside Hong Kong, who may engage in activities elsewhere in the world, who could, if there are extradition agreements in place, requests for their extradition could be made. And even if those requests are not met, it ties up our systems with dealing with those requests. So I think it's absolutely right to suspend the agreement. But the question was, will there be retaliation? Sure. I think we should brace ourselves for retaliation on this and on the Huawei decision. and on the BNO decision that was made a few weeks ago, clearly the UK's relationship with China, with the party state in China, is going through a long overdue, very welcome, but I'm sure somewhat bumpy readjustment and realignment. And I think it's right that we stand up for our values and for our national security. I also think too often we overestimate the value of Chinese investment. And I think as part of our realignment, we should be reducing our strategic dependency on China in the sectors where that exists. We should be diversifying our supply chains and accepting embracing this new change. But will there be short-term consequences and retaliation? I'm sure there will be. I don't know what exactly they will be, but we should be prepared for them.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. So our next question, would you like to? Mr. Matus?
I wonder if I could add something to that, because Canada itself has already been the victim of retaliation for something else they did. They acceded to an American extradition request for Meng Wanzhou, who's the chief financial officer for Huawei, and she's in Canada pending trial. And after that, the Chinese kidnapped a couple Canadians that were in China, Michael Spavor, Michael Kovrig, who were senior in the work that they were doing, and basically just picked up because they were sufficiently senior that the government of China considered it a retaliation, and also cut off exports of canola from Canada to China. And, just following up on what Robert Spalding says, I mean, one of the disadvantages we have with free trade from China, it becomes a kind of leverage that they can use for retaliation, but cutting off the trade that's developed in case the country from which their customers come are not agreeing with them, with what they're doing. And following up on what Mr. Yun says, we have to keep in mind we are dealing with a criminal enterprise, and that this enterprise will resort to revenge, retaliation, hostage taking, anything that's within their power to respond to what they don't like seeing abroad, even if what is happening abroad is in conformity with legal standards and principles. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matus. Yeah, Mr. Yuan, please go ahead. Mr. Yuan.
Just to cancel the extradition law is a slap on the wrist. You need to decouple with the whole country. Recall your ambassador to China and send their embassy back. Send their whole envoy back. You need to. This is the most severe virus. I'm talking about the CCP itself. It's the most severe virus. You need to stay away from them and keep a distance to be safe. What USA is banning all the CCP members to come is trying, and not yet decided, to ban them to come to the United States is something like that. Right? And every country should do the same. Until we fix the CCP problem, we should not let them come to any of our countries. We are defenseless. Let me tell you, whether the virus, there's no question they manufactured the virus. All right, it's been spliced, and one little tube can destroy a whole city if they come in. We have to cut the travel altogether with the whole country of China, and if they can make 1 gram of virus, they can make a kilogram of virus. If they can make one kind of virus, they can make 100 kind of virus. This is the cheapest. There are 40 P4 and P3 labs in China, well funded, and they are giving them more funding because that is the most effective weapon in the world, cheapest to transport. And we are still sleeping. We let them travel here. It's a crime. It's a crime. It's a crime of not protecting our citizens. Finish.
Thank you, Mr. Yuan. And that actually leads on to the next question, which is from guest 125. And this is again to the panel. what role do individuals in the UK have to play to oppose injustice of the CCP? Who would like to take that question first? Dr. Spalding, please go ahead. Yep, Dr. Spalding.
Yeah, so three things that I tell people. One is you have to educate yourself and those around you. So educate and advocate is one. Be supportive of these efforts on social media, and then most importantly, engage your political representatives and vote. Primarily, we live in democracies, and we need to utilize the democratic process to ensure that our political representatives are representing our interests. And anytime a representative is promoting a relationship with the Chinese Communist Party or a continuation of the established patterns of behavior that we've had over the last 3 decades, I think they need to be taken out of office. And so, it is up to all of us to be engaged, to be educated, to be involved.
Thank you very much, Dr. Spalding. Would anybody else like to add to that? Okay, so our next question is from Cameron Rose, and this is to Dr. Spalding. You assert that coronavirus was spread throughout the world by the deliberate action of the CCP. Do you mean that by that deliberate production of the virus for malicious purposes, or the way it handled the virus when it broke out? Dr. Spalding.
Yeah, I distinguish between the two. We don't know for sure where the virus came from because we haven't been able to get investigators there on the ground. And I doubt the Chinese Communist Party will allow that ever to take place. I think what we can look at is the actions of the leadership of Beijing. Xi Jinping himself said he was in charge of Wuhan on the 7th of January. Between the 7th of January and the 23rd of January, when Wuhan was closed, 5 million people traveled out of Wuhan, many to international destinations. That's in spite of the fact that both the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization knew that there was human-to-human transmission. So it was a deliberate effort to ensure that China's economy wasn't the only economy that suffered the impact of the coronavirus. And to add insult to injury, they, at the same time, they were turning from a net exporter of PPE and masks to a net importer as they controlled the supply, not only in China, the production, but also the supply in countries around the world through their proxies. So clearly the pandemic itself and the spread of it was deliberately orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party. I do not know about the origin, and we probably won't know specific or in point of fact because they're not going to allow us to investigate.
Thank you, Dr. Spalding. So the next one is from a guest, and it's actually a comment rather than a question. So I agree that the CCP is a criminal organization, but many of the 90 million CCP members are passive and victims themselves. In the party rulebook, members cannot even withdraw. They can only be expelled. There's been a grassroots movement offering Chinese people opportunities to withdraw from CCP-affiliated organizations for nearly 2 decades. So far, there's been 360 million people registered online to denounce the CCP. We should encourage people to spread the word about it, and it will speed up the fall of the CCP. So that's a guest comment. Any of you want to comment on that? Mr. Yuan?
In the what do you call the CCP, their constitution, it says that you are allowed to resign from the party. Of course, if you resign, you lose all your privilege, housing, medical benefit, children's school. You don't get the privilege of a better class than the normal people. So those people enjoy the benefit, and they are waiting for instruction from higher up. Anytime they give me instruction to commit any crime or lie, they would do it. They would do it without hesitation. And this is a privileged class. The CCP members is a privileged class. They should resign right away. Otherwise, all these people should go to the International Court of Justice. These are very criminals, nothing else. And and they may look like good guys. It's like the crime families, all right? Very good to their family and friends, but it doesn't mean they are not criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Yuan. And Dr. Spalding?
Yeah, I support the banning of travel of Communist Party members to the United States. And I also believe that they can publicly, renounce their membership and denounce if they do want to travel. I think it's clear that, you can't just say, I don't have any other choice but to join the Communist Party and expect that will be sufficient to absolve yourself from association of all the crimes against humanity that's conducted on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you, Dr. Spalding. And so our next question from a guest, and it's for the panel. Some who are worrying about Brexit argue that now is not the time to upset China when there could be no trade deal with EU and the deal with US is not signed either. What are your views on this worry? And who would like to take this question first? Mr. Rogers, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think it's. I've long believed that there are two myths about trade with China. The first is the myth that that essentially says that it's much bigger than it really is. China accounts for even though it may be our third largest trading partner, it's way behind the United States and the European Union. I forget the exact figures, but I think it's something like 6% of our trade. And of course, 6% is not negligible, but nevertheless, we do so much more trade already with the United States and the European Union. And I think that we should be diversifying our supply chains, diversifying our trading relationships, doing much more with our traditional friends and allies, with Australia, New Zealand, and Canada as well, and with other markets in the Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Africa, strengthening our relations with Japan, with Korea. I also think Taiwan, which hasn't been mentioned yet, should be part of this whole discussion about realignment. If you look at the parallel of other divided countries, if you want to put it that way, the Korean Peninsula and Germany at the time of the Soviet Union, we were never in any doubt about which half of those divided countries we stood with, both economically and in terms of our values. South Korea, West Germany, very clearly our allies. We ought to be making much more of the fact that Taiwan, as a vibrant democracy, a free economy, a government that has handled the COVID-19 pandemic in an exemplary way, we should be strengthening both our values relationship, but also our trading relationship with Taiwan and with other countries in Southeast Asia. So the world is big. China is not as big as it thinks it is in terms of trade. There have been a lot of deals, for example, when Xi Jinping came to the UK in 2015 on a state visit that he signed that have never materialized. And I think we have enough friends in the world to diversify our trade and not worry too much. Sure, we will probably take, there'll be some setbacks temporarily, but I think the cost, if we don't do that, the cost to our values, our freedoms, our security far outweighs the short-term difficulties that we may endure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. So we just have a few minutes left today. And before we wrap up, I'd like to ask each of our guests this one last question. What lesson or advice would you say is important to understanding the Chinese Communist Party? So if each of you could say a few words, who would like to go first?
Well, I don't mind starting on this. I'm coming at this basically from the perspective as a researcher and writer and dealing with organ transplant abuse. And if there's one lesson I feel that I've learned is never take anything that anybody coming from the Chinese Chinese Communist Party or government is saying at face value that anything and everything has to be independently verified. So that's, for me, dealing with research and writing, the primary lesson I feel I've learned.
Dr. Spalding?
Sure. I think it's something, the thing that we need to be aware about of the Chinese Communist Party from a national security perspective is that they use economics and information to undermine democratic institutions and democratic societies. So our connection to the Chinese Communist Party, just by the connection itself, leads to a rise of authoritarianism throughout the world.
Thank you, Dr. Spalding. And Mr. Yuan, would you like to go next?
It's very simple. If you don't get rid of them, they get rid of you. It's simple as that. And you must do it now because they have a way to get stronger and stronger. They just let the people suffer. And then the power, right? The power, they have military power and infiltration power and all that, they can grow and just let the people suffer. There is no people in China. So if you don't get rid of that, they end up controlling you. So we must get rid of them once and for all.
Thank you, Mr. Yuan. And Mr. Rogers?
Building on all of the previous comments, I think we have to wake up and recognize two things. Firstly, that the Chinese Communist Party is not only a grave danger and an extremely repressive and increasingly repressive body to its own people, but it is a direct threat to our freedoms and our way of life in all the ways that we've discussed on this panel. And if anyone hasn't yet read this new book called Hidden Hand, which really details the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party in all our different key institutions, our universities, our businesses, our politics, I really recommend that book. And it's time to wake up to that and disentangle ourselves from it. But related to that, I also think that, and I think we are starting now to do this, although long overdue. For too long, we kowtowed to the Chinese Communist Party, and we need to learn that when we kowtow to them, we just embolden them further. Whereas actually, when we stand up to them, yes, there may be some blowback, of course, but actually, the only language they understand is strength, and we need to be strong in defending our values, defending our security, defending the rights of people in China, and standing up rather than kowtowing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. And thank you to all, especially to our speakers today, for your wonderful insights